Hi everyone, my name is Leslie Webble. I have been a product manager for 3 years and I've ran a startup for 2 years. I'm going to talk about the product lifecycle today. It's an essential model to understand what a product's life is going to be throughout its existence, how well it performs, and what stage that product is at. It's going to help you make decisions on whether or not, what kind of strategic choices you might make, right? So let's first start with the development phase. So in the development phase, we're going to be concerned about resources, the scope of what the product might be, how big it is. Some people like to use like minimal viable product or MLP, which is minimal lovable product, as a way to kind of just say, hey, look, what can we build at the most low cost thing to create the experience that someone wants that can translate into someone buying it, right? Now, just had a quick audio issue. I apologize for that. So I'm going to move my headset over here. And then the other part of that is going to be time. How long is it going to take? Should your sprint to make something take months or should it take weeks? And I think that really depends on the market and the product and the customers that you work with actively. I think in the software industry, things should move a lot faster. You should be getting things built in a matter of weeks or even days, possibly, versus building a hardware product, a physical product that might take a few months to kind of get to manufacturing and kind of getting those first test units out to customers. And then finally, I think you want to find evidence from the market and getting feedback. Being flexible is really important. Flexibility. There we go. Also, finally, like I said, time and speed are really a really important part of that. And the second part is going to be introduction. So an introduction, this is where you take your MVP and you're going to finally just launch it out there and people are going to enjoy it and give it a shot, or they might not, most likely not like it. And at this time, you want to collect as much data as you can and kind of learn what works and doesn't work, right? And you want to find what are called early adopters or innovators, people who love new technology or love new products, and they want to give it a shot compared to everything else. That's usually where you'll encounter a problem called the chasm. And the chasm is where products struggle to reach growth. And with growth, when you do achieve growth, it's another conversation that I'll get into later talking about it, but products will struggle to grow because they don't really have kind of an example or a use case for specific sets of customers. Most customers, in the majority, don't really want to adopt a new innovative product because that comes with a lot of risk. If I go to a website and I kind of see that they're not really a mature website, they don't have all the details, I might not put my credit card information there. I might not trust them to share my password or lose my password within their software system. So looking like a mature company might be really important for your long-term growth. But usually in growth, you're going to worry about server capacity. Um, you're going to worry about improving the UX, right? So if you improve the UX, that's going to drive up server capacity. So you're going to need to make a balance between making improvements that drive a lot of clicks in the app compared to how much people are using resources on the server, and kind of evaluating what really makes sense for customers and what really makes sense financially there. Other things that happen in the growth phase are going to be the go-to-market campaign. Really, the go-to-market campaign could be its whole nother section. I'm going to build a template to share with everyone about that, but you're really thinking about who is the customer, right? You can have many customer personas or target customers who have different demographics, different needs, different demand curves. Some people might be more demand inelastic, right, or more elastic, where their willingness to buy something is not so great, or they're just put in a tough position. They'll buy it no matter what. So it's good to understand who your customers are and whether or not they would buy it, and understanding their pain points. And really, understanding your customer comes back to your USP, your USBP, I guess, your unique value proposition. You know, what is it you're selling? If you could really tell me in one sentence, what are you offering customers that with your product to their problem, that's what you really want to figure out. And what media do they use? How do you reach your customers, right? A lot of customers, maybe in the Gen Z, I'm Gen Z actually, I'm 28, believe it or not, kind of teetering on millennial there, but you might find Gen Z on TikTok, right? Or on YouTube, or you might find, Gen X on LinkedIn, for example, and YouTube. So just kind of like learn where that community sort of lives, um, and reaching out to them is really important. So understanding where and when to present your product is really important there too. And then finally, you're going to talk about pricing also here. Pricing, I think, is a really core thing. I think there's a whole video on pricing discrimination, pricing strategies. A lot of companies, if you're a SaaS software model, you use the subscription-based model, but that might not work for all software products or markets per se. Some markets, I think some physical products, it doesn't make sense to always have the subscription. And I think those companies might struggle with their revenue or kind of finding a good product market fit with their pricing with those customers. But once you have a lot of growth with a product, and depending on a company you join, if you start a startup, right, you're going to, let me bring up my marker here. Choose red. If you're a startup, you're somewhere over here most of the time. If you join a mature company, somebody that's been around for 20 or 30 years, they're usually going to be in the growth phase and even possibly in the maturity phase. And in the maturity phase, usually you're going to have kind of like a director of product management, a senior product managers, and then product managers within a team that are all doing competitive analysis and managing the product and doing PRDs and kind of making improvements. And what they're trying to really do is kind of extend that life cycle for the product. And let's look at a real, I show you an example of Facebook story. So in the 2000s, Facebook came out and they had millions of users. And what they needed to do was to kind of increase the total growth of users, right? They wanted to extend the product's life cycle. So you had Facebook. What extended Facebook was translations, right? So translating, English and to, French, Chinese, Italian, whatever it may be, led to a ton of growth, 500 million users globally, right? And then what happened in the 2000s with the introduction of the iPhone here, mobile came, and mobile just, helped that growth of the product and extended its life cycle completely. And that innovation, and this video by Gustav Alstormer from Y Combinator does a great explanation. I'll leave a link below in the description for further education and kind of learning from him. Is that there's certain techniques or features or kind of understanding a trend that you can kind of extend that product's life cycle. For example, if we are a legacy B2B business, and we do enterprise on-premises deployment, life extension could be SaaS, for example, and that life extension could increase revenue and increase accessibility, because what SaaS is really about is making it easier, for the average person to get access to your product and kind of try it out. And usually some companies and some products experience an end of life, and usually you're managing in decline, and that means like cost cutting, turning off features, kind of saying, hey, the support for the multiplayer server is going to die. We just don't have enough users or new things to keep it alive. So that's where things are kind of managed to the end. And honestly, I think there's a lot of products that their end of life cycle could even come back through really smart techniques. I think I've seen some communities in video game groups. Look at Retail WoW. It was on a decline, and the community created private servers for themselves to play classic WoW. And through that, Blizzard introduced classic servers back to their product, and they kind of helped grow the community back things like hardcore and things like that. So there's things I think companies can do to kind of help preserve the life of a product, but most of the time they're focused on extending that and things like that. So let's talk about a little bit of the history of this chart. How did we come to this chart? And I'm going to talk about the chasm a little bit too in product market fit. So originally, the idea of this chart came from Gabriel um, Tardet, and essentially he found out that the way we have culture within society as a sociologist is through an idea called diffusion. Basically, culture is diffused directly, indirectly, or forcefully between groups of people in society. There's this kind of funny image of McDonald's importing the idea of McDonald's to other countries. This is more of an exaggeration than anything of what this idea is. But then eventually in the 1960s, there was this researcher, Everett Rogers, who I'll talk about and show you in a minute. He worked on a project about hybrid corn being introduced in Iowa to farmers, and this corn actually increased yield by 20%. But the problem is that this new technology was not immediately adopted, right? It took over 13 years to achieve adoption of this new hybrid corn. And that led to the research of called diffusion theory and innovation theory, of the idea that how is new technology adopted and used by humans? And this is a study in sociology, the study of society and how society functions, right? Or its purpose and things like that. So on average, it took farmers 7 years to just finally adopt this hybrid corn seed. And through this research of what they call innovative diffusion, Everett Rogers at Ohio State University coined this term, and it's cited quite frequently in his book. And this kind of impacted rural psychology and other fields of sociology, not psychology, sociology. He went on to create this chart, and this chart will look very familiar to you. It looks like the product life cycle chart, very much. And he's kind of described how innovators and innovations or technological products evolve through markets. And a lot of marketers adopted this idea. You have the innovators that form the 2.5%, and the early adopters are the 13.5%, and the early majority and the late majority and the laggards are people who need the product to be more widely adopted by others before they even buy that product. It's sort of like if Excel came out for the first time this year, Excel would only sell to innovators, right? And then the next year it might sell early adopters. But if I'm IBM, I'm not going to use Excel until HP starts using Excel. Is kind of that logic. Now, this idea goes on. I'm going to talk about it a little bit more here, but what he kind of learned, and you can look this online, is that for people to kind of buy into innovative products, they think about how well does this innovation fit my values and my workflow, for example. Can I try it out for free? The free trial, right? Are there any advantages that make this thing better than the last thing I'm doing? Are there any, can I actually see a benefit versus just saying there is a benefit? And then finally, what's the usability? I think honestly, it's they talk about simplicity, and this is why we try to make software as usable as possible. Is it easy to learn and easy to grasp? And if it is, more people will use it. And there's also, I think this is great for if you think about the sales process a little bit. The 5 decisions on innovative process. You'll learn about a product first or a technology, and then you need to persuade them to use it, right? Like really convince them like, hey, these are the benefits. I think you should do a free trial. And then they need to make a decision. Either they're going to try your product out for free, or they're going to reject it, or they're going to buy it and implement it. And then they look for confirmation. So we've bought the product, right? Everyone's using it. It's there. But they need to see the confirmation that it's really making a significant change in their workflow. And if it's not, they're going to leave that technology behind. Now, this idea of innovation diffusion by Everett Rogers was turned into the idea of the innovative adoption life cycles, also called the technology adoption life cycle. And they introduced this idea of a chasm. So there's this book called Crossing the Chasm. I recommend you get right here. I don't know if you can see it, but right here it's called Crossing the Chasm. It's worth the pickup. It describes a lot of the pitfalls high-end technology companies experience. So if you remember the Segway, for example, there was a lot of people who actually bought Segways, and it was worth millions, right? There were the innovators and the visionary users of Segways, but then there are the pragmatists. And this goes into the user types a little bit more, but you have people who are really excited about a new technology, and they'll always work with you. And then there's the visionaries. They will also adopt it, but they also want to communicate that they're using the latest innovation to everyone else. There has to be sort of a prestige related to it. But what happens here is that in the pragmatists, when you go to sell to pragmatists, there's this chasm and there's a disconnect. And it's where around the product you build, you have a core product, you need supporting elements of that product. Think training, customer support, use cases. There's a lot more you can go into about this book that I think I'll make a few videos on about the chasm and crossing the chasm. But really, the basic advice is that you need to pick really a specific niche of the market. Like, let's say, okay, somewhere in the market here, there is a beachhead, and we can make our crossing over really quickly and kind of win the battle there. And that's what you want to do. And I think I've been fortunate enough to experience that with one of the products I've worked on. And one of those larger, like early majority companies decided to take on the product and try it out. And of course, they give feedback and things like that. But over time, conservative groups will not adopt the product, but they'll need to see other companies use the product first before they go into buy, right? And then finally, you have the laggards. There's people who are just not going to buy the EV until EVs has all the bells and whistles. They're cheap and affordable. They'll wait until the product is fully developed and mature until they start buying. And that's what kind of comes back to the product life cycle up here again, is that, laggards are usually at the maturity end to the decline. And even then, I think if you do a life extension, you might not really you'll capture more laggards, I think, but you also find kind of new customer types to capture there. So that should kind of give you an idea of the product life cycle and where it came from and, how to think about it. I mean, I think some key metrics you're measuring are going to be revenue, and you're going to be measuring user retention at the end of the day. And I think we can make another video where we go into the math about that and some Excel, but that covers the basics of it. And you just want to be aware of when in product management for your career or the field is that really where are you kind of in a startup company? If you're applying to a startup company, you want to be doing some tactics to really make this work and then crossing the chasm. But if you're in mature B2B, you're going to do a lot more learning. What's the history of the product? What are some core features that customers love? What are some things we don't really want to change? And what are some things that we want to change to extend its life cycle? And those are really tough questions. And I think that requires a really mature team to collaborate with and mature and back that up. So anyways, thank you for watching. This is, I'm going to make a lot more videos. If you could subscribe, I would really appreciate that. Like the button too, and sign up for my newsletter. I'm working on a book. It's an ebook. It's going to be free if you sign up now, but in the future it might be $2, $5. We'll see. But yeah, thanks for your support. I appreciate it a lot. If you have feedback, please leave a comment or any questions. I'm happy to answer questions. So thank you so much.